Jake had always wanted to help. It was why he joined the Earth Alliance military when he was old enough. He didn't care about fame or glory. What mattered was making a difference. That's why when the call came to assist a distant planet under attack by alien forces, he volunteered without hesitation. He wasn't expecting anything grand. He was just doing his job. The planet was far from Earth, in a system located on the outer rim of the galaxy. The inhabitants were a peaceful species, but they had no way to defend themselves against the aggressive alien species that had taken interest in their resources. Earth had sent a small team of soldiers to assist them, providing tactical support, medical aid, and, most importantly, rescue operations for the civilians who were in danger. Jake had been given a small squad to work with. They landed in a quiet settlement on the edge of the main city. The mission was simple: evacuate the citizens and make sure they were safe. But things quickly went sideways. As Jake and his team made their way through the settlement, the sound of laser fire echoed in the distance. The aliens were closer than expected. Jake's squad moved quickly, pushing through the narrow streets, ducking behind buildings as explosions shook the ground beneath their feet. Jake's heart raced as he led the team toward a group of civilians huddled near the central square. His eyes scanned the area for any signs of alien movement, but it was hard to see anything in the thick smoke. Then, a woman's scream broke through the chaos. Without thinking, Jake sprinted toward the sound. His instincts kicked in, and his training took over. He reached a small alley and saw a woman, no older than 30, being dragged toward a group of alien invaders. They were tall and frightening, their armor gleaming under the dim sky. The woman struggled, but it was clear she was no match for them. Jake didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, his fingers moving swiftly as he took aim. The first shot hit the alien in the shoulder, knocking it back. The others turned, and Jake fired again, hitting another one in the chest. The remaining two hesitated for a moment. Before they charged at him, he quickly sidestepped, drawing a sidearm as he disabled one with a quick shot to the head. The last alien hesitated, clearly calculating its chances. Jake knew that hesitation meant it was time to finish the job. He took the shot, ending the fight. When the smoke cleared, Jake found himself standing over the woman, who was now kneeling on the ground, gasping for breath. Her wide eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She was beautiful, in an otherworldly way, with features that seemed delicate but strong. Her hair, long and dark, framed her face, and her clothes, though torn, carried an air of nobility. It was clear she wasn't just any civilian. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice shaking. "I thought I was going to die." Jake offered her a hand, pulling her up. "You're safe now. Let's get you out of here." But before they could leave, an explosion rocked the ground beneath them, throwing both of them to the ground. The woman cried out in pain as debris fell around them. Jake quickly grabbed her and pulled her into the shelter of a nearby building. "Stay low," Jake ordered as they crawled behind the thick walls of a collapsed structure. The sounds of battle continued outside, but for now, they were safe. The woman looked up at Jake, her eyes full of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life." Jake nodded. "It's what I'm here for. Let's focus on getting you somewhere safe." They stayed hidden for a while as the battle raged on outside. Eventually, Jake's team made contact, and they were able to extract the woman and the others from the settlement. The evacuation wasn't easy, but it was successful. They made it to the transport ship just as the sun began to rise on the war-torn world. As Jake boarded the ship, he glanced at the woman one last time. She was sitting quietly, her eyes distant. She had not said much during the journey, but Jake understood. The shock of what had just happened was still settling in. He wanted to comfort her, but he knew he had a job to do. The transport ship lifted off, leaving the devastated planet behind. They were heading to a temporary safe zone, but for Jake, it was just another mission. He had done his job, and he was proud of that. But something about the woman's eyes stuck with him. There was something more to her, something he couldn't shake off. Once they arrived at the safe zone, Jake went to the debriefing room. His team gathered around, exchanging stories of their own missions. Jake didn't say much. His mind kept wandering back to the woman he had saved. Who was she? Why had she been out there in the first place? After the debriefing, Jake walked outside the base. The fresh air was a welcome change from the thick smoke and the sounds of war. He leaned against a wall, taking a moment to clear his head. Just as he was about to head back inside, a woman's voice called out from behind him, "Are you the one who saved me?" Jake turned to see the woman from the settlement walking toward him. This time, she looked different. She was standing tall, her posture confident, but there was still a hint of weariness in her eyes. "Yes, I am," Jake replied. "Are you all right?" She nodded, offering a small smile. "Fine, but I think you deserve to know something important. My name is Lyra, and I am not just anyone." Jake's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Lyra took a deep breath. "I am the daughter of the leader of this planet's resistance. My mother. You saved her life." Jake froze. The weight of her words hit him like a ton of bricks. He had no idea who he had truly helped. The woman he had saved wasn't just a civilian. She was the daughter of someone significant. His simple act of kindness had set in motion something much bigger than he had ever imagined. As the reality of the situation settled in, Jake knew his life was about to change. What had begun as a simple mission to help had just opened up a new chapter in his journey, one that was far more complicated and dangerous than he had ever anticipated. Jake stood there, stunned, as Lyra's words settled in. He had saved the daughter of the resistance leader, a woman of great importance on this war-torn planet. He had no idea. What had started as just another rescue mission had now turned into something far more complicated. Lyra's expression softened, seeing the confusion on Jake's face. "I know this is a lot to take in," she said, "but I need you to understand. My mother was the leader of the resistance. She gave everything to fight for our people, and now I'm left to carry on her work." Jake swallowed hard. He had no idea. He thought he was just helping a civilian. But now it seemed like his actions were part of something much larger than he could have ever imagined. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I just wanted to help." Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know you did, and you did more than you realize. You saved my mother's life when no one else could. That's why I'm here, trying to figure out how to carry on her work." Jake felt a mix of emotions, guilt, pride, confusion. He had always wanted to help, but now he was caught in the middle of something that felt far beyond his control. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra paused, as if thinking carefully. "I'm not sure yet, but you've already done something no one else could. You've helped me more than you know just by being here." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation hanging in the air. Jake had come here to help, to rescue a few civilians, but now it seemed like the fate of an entire planet was tied to his actions. He had never signed up for something like this. Finally, Lyra broke the silence. "The war isn't over, Jake. My mother's death has left a power vacuum. The resistance is fractured, and without a strong leader, we're losing ground. There are factions, even among our own people, who are turning against each other. Need help bringing them together?" Jake took a deep breath, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't know much about galactic politics or resistance movements," he said honestly. "I'm just a soldier, but I can try to help." Lyra smiled, a small but grateful smile. "You've already done more than you think." She stepped closer, her gaze intense. "This war is about more than just fighting. It's about uniting people who've been torn apart. I can't do this alone." Jake nodded slowly. "I'll help, however I can." In the days that followed, Jake found himself thrust into a world of politics and strategy that he had never imagined. Lyra took him to a base on the outskirts of the planet's capital, the hidden place where the remaining leaders of the resistance had gathered. The base was old, a leftover from the early days of the war. But it was still functional. Inside, Jake met the leaders of the remaining factions. They were a mixed group, some soldiers, some politicians, and some civilians who had once fought alongside Lyra's mother. Each one had their own vision for the future of the planet, but there was one thing they all agreed on. They needed a strong leader. And with Lyra's mother gone, that leader had to be her. But not everyone agreed with that. Some of the leaders were skeptical of Lyra, questioning her ability to lead after her mother's death. They wanted change, something new. Others believed that Jake, a human, could bring something unique to the table. They saw him as an outsider, someone who wasn't bound by the same politics and old grudges. Jake wasn't sure what he was getting into. He had thought his role would be simple, but now he was caught in a web of politics and alliances. There were no easy answers, and every decision seemed to carry weight. Lyra was under pressure from all sides. Jake could see how much it was affecting her. One night, after a long day of meetings, Jake found Lyra sitting alone in a dimly lit room, staring out at the stars. He approached quietly, unsure of what to say. "Is everything okay?" he asked softly. Lyra turned to look at him, her eyes tired but determined. "I'm not sure. There are so many people who are relying on me, and I don't know if I'm ready for this." Jake sat down beside her, his eyes on the stars as well. "None of us are ever really ready for something like this," he said, his voice calm. "You don't have to do it alone. You've got people who believe in you, and you've got me. I'll help however I can." Lyra looked at him, her gaze softening. "I don't know what I would do without you, Jake." Jake smiled gently. "You don't have to worry about that. We're in this together." For a moment they sat in silence, the weight of the situation hanging heavy between them. Jake couldn't help but think that he had stepped into something far bigger than he had ever expected. But as he looked at Lyra, he realized that it didn't matter. She needed help, and he was going to give it to her. The next day they set out to visit the other factions. The leaders were still divided, and tensions were high. Some wanted peace at any cost, while others were determined to continue the fight. It was a delicate balance, and Jake could see the strain on Lyra's face as she navigated each conversation. Jake spoke with some of the leaders, trying to find common ground between them. It wasn't easy. Many were still loyal to Lyra's mother and resented the idea of a new leader. Others were too focused on their own agendas to listen to reason, but slowly, with Jake's help, they began to find small victories. After a long day of meetings, Jake sat down with Lyra in a quiet corner of the base. She was exhausted, her shoulders slumped with the weight of the responsibility. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she said quietly. "There's so much pressure, and I'm not sure if I'm the right person for this." Jake placed a hand on her shoulder, offering her a reassuring smile. "You're stronger than you think, Lyra, and you don't have to do it alone." She met his gaze, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jake. I don't know what I would do without you." Jake's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. In that moment, he realized that he wasn't just helping her. He was beginning to care for her in a way he hadn't expected. And as much as he tried to ignore it, the feelings were growing stronger with each passing day. The next few weeks were a blur for Jake. Every day he found himself deeper in the tangled web of galactic politics. Torn between factions, leaders, and military strategies, Lyra had become the center of it all. Everywhere they went, people looked to her, waiting for direction. And yet, despite her strength, Jake could see the weight of her responsibilities beginning to take its toll. He had never signed up for any of this. Back on Earth, his role had been simple: rescue, assist, protect. Now he was involved in complex negotiations with alien leaders, trying to help Lyra unite the fractured resistance. Every decision felt more significant than the last. He was beginning to question whether he was actually helping, or if he was just another piece in a much larger game. One evening, after a long day of discussions, Jake sat in the small room he had been assigned. His mind was racing, the stress weighing on him like never before. He glanced at the door and then back at the data pads scattered across the table, trying to make sense of the information he had gathered. A soft knock on the door broke his thoughts. "Come in," Jake called, looking up from the data. Lyra stepped inside, her expression weary but determined. "We need to talk," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. Jake stood, gesturing for her to sit. "What's on your mind?" She sat down, her hands resting on the table. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice hesitant. "I don't know if we can keep going like this. The factions aren't listening. They're so focused on their own agendas that they're not seeing the bigger picture. And it's hurting the people we're trying to save." Jake could hear the frustration in her voice. It wasn't like Lyra to show weakness. She'd always been the one to keep it together, even when everything around her was falling apart. Now it seemed like she was cracking under the pressure. "Maybe we need to change our approach," Jake said, walking over to the window. "I know you're doing everything you can, but these people aren't just going to change their minds overnight. You need to find a way to show them what they're fighting for." Lyra's eyes met his, a quiet understanding passing between them. "I know, but how do we do that? How do we convince them that peace is possible when they've been fighting for so long? And how do I lead when I don't even know if I'm the right person for this job?" Jake paused for a moment, considering her words. "I think you're the right person. You have the strength, the heart, and the vision to lead. It's just ... They need to see that. They need to know that you're not just another leader with empty promises." Lyra looked down at her hands, her expression uncertain. "It's not just that, Jake. My mother ... She was a symbol. People followed her because they believed in her, not just because she was a great leader, but because they trusted her. How can I live up to that? How can I fill her shoes?" Jake walked back to her and sat down, his voice gentle. "You don't have to fill anyone's shoes. You're not your mother. You're you. And that's more than enough." Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would do without you." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had never expected to be in this situation. He'd come to help, but now he found himself deeply invested in Lyra's cause, not just as an ally, but as something more. It was hard to ignore the connection growing between them, even though he tried. They had become close, sharing not just the weight of the war, but their personal struggles as well. But even as his feelings for Lyra deepened, he couldn't ignore the looming tension. The factions were still divided, and the stakes were higher than ever. Every move they made felt like it could be the difference between peace and total chaos. The next day, Jake and Lyra were summoned to a meeting with the most influential leaders of the resistance. These were the people who controlled the fate of the war, the ones who held the power to decide whether they would unite or fall apart. The tension in the room was palpable, and Jake could feel it as soon as he stepped inside. "Lyra, Jake," said one of the leaders, a tall alien with dark, piercing eyes. "We've been waiting for your proposal. We need to know how you plan to unite us. The factions are divided, and we're losing ground every day." Lyra stood tall, her voice steady, despite the pressure. "I understand the situation, but I also know that peace is possible. We just need to find common ground. We cannot continue to fight among ourselves while the rest of the galaxy watches. If we do not unite, we will lose everything." Jake could see that not all the leaders were convinced. Some looked skeptical, while others seemed eager to listen. But one leader, a gruff older man with a deep scar running down his face, spoke up. "And what makes you think you can lead us, Lyra? You're too young. Your mother was the one who held us together. What makes you think you can do the same?" Lyra didn't flinch. "Because I have something my mother didn't have. I have the trust of people like Jake. I have the strength to make the hard choices, and I won't back down. This war has cost us enough. We need to work together if we want to save what's left of our people." Jake could feel the weight of the room's gaze on him. He wasn't sure if his words would make any difference, but he knew he had to speak up. "We've all lost something," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We're all fighting for the same thing: peace, survival, and a future. It's time to put aside our differences and focus on what matters." There was a long pause as the leaders exchanged looks. Finally, the older man with the scar spoke again. "You have a point. Talk is cheap. We need action." Lyra nodded. "We'll take action. But we need your help. We can't do this alone." The room fell silent as the leaders deliberated. Jake couldn't help but wonder if this was the turning point. Would they choose to unite, or would they let their differences tear them apart? The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. As the meeting came to a close, Jake and Lyra left the room, their minds racing. Jake could see that the road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but he was starting to believe that they might have a chance at peace. Together, they might just be able to make the galaxy a little bit brighter. As they walked through the halls of the base, Lyra turned to Jake, her eyes filled with resolve. "We're getting closer, Jake. I can feel it. We're making progress." Jake smiled, though his heart was still heavy. One step at a time, he said, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The days following the meeting with the resistance leaders were tense. Despite the progress they had made, the path to unity still seemed far off. Jake and Lyra worked tirelessly, traveling to different regions, speaking to faction leaders, and trying to convince them that peace was possible. Some listened, others didn't, but every conversation felt like a small victory. Even if they were barely moving forward, Jake had never thought that diplomacy would be so exhausting. Back on Earth, he had been trained for combat, for action. But now, his days were spent in long meetings, trying to bridge the divide between people who had been fighting for so long that they had forgotten what peace even looked like. One afternoon, after yet another unsuccessful negotiation, Jake found himself alone in the quiet courtyard of the base. The weight of the war, the division, and the constant pressure to fix things were starting to wear him down. He leaned against a wall, looking up at the sky, trying to find some peace of his own. Jake. He turned to see Lyra standing a few feet away, her face serious but kind. She had been working as hard as he had, maybe even harder. Jake could see the toll it was taking on her. She had always been strong, but even the strongest people had their limits. "Hey," Jake said, offering a tired smile. "What's up?" Lyra stepped closer, her eyes filled with concern. "You've been quiet lately? Is everything okay?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, sighing. "I don't know, Lyra. I'm starting to feel like we're running in circles. We keep trying to make peace, but no one's really listening. Feels like we're losing more ground with every day." Lyra nodded, her gaze distant, as if she were thinking the same thing. "I know, it's frustrating. We're getting closer, but sometimes it feels like we're too far from the finish line. There's so much pressure on me, on all of us." Jake looked at her, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes. "You don't have to carry this all on your own, you know." She met his gaze, and for a moment, they just stood there in silence, the weight of everything they were fighting for hanging in the air. Lyra had been so focused on leading her people, on honoring her mother's legacy, that she had forgotten what it was like to lean on someone else. Jake understood that feeling he had. Always been the one to help others, never the one to ask for help himself. "I know," she said quietly, "but sometimes I feel like if I show any weakness, I'll lose their trust. They're looking to me for answers, Jake. They're looking for hope. I don't want to let them down." "You won't," Jake replied softly. "You're doing more than anyone could ask for. But it's okay to ask for help too. We're in this together. You're not alone." Lyra gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The bond between them had grown stronger over the past few weeks, and he had started to realize that he cared for Lyra in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. He found himself drawn to her strength, her compassion, and the way she fought for what she believed in. But he also knew that now wasn't the time to act on those feelings. The war was still raging, and they had a long way to go before they could think about anything else. "Any time," Jake said, his voice steady. "We'll figure this out, together." The following week, Lyra and Jake were called to a critical meeting with a group of faction leaders who had been hesitant to join the peace talks. They had their own agendas, and it seemed like every step forward was met with resistance. But this time, Jake had a plan. He knew that convincing these leaders to trust Lyra wasn't going to be easy, but he had an idea that might work. As they sat in the dimly lit conference room, Jake noticed the cold stares from the leaders across the table. They weren't just skeptical. They were downright hostile. The room felt tense, and Jake could sense Lyra's unease. She had been the one to invite these leaders, and now she was facing their judgment. "Lyra," said one of the leaders, a tall, grizzled alien with a scar across his cheek, "your mother was a great leader. But you've done nothing but talk about peace while our people suffer. We don't need empty promises. We need results." Jake could feel Lyra stiffen beside him. The words cut deep, and he could see the hurt in her eyes, but she didn't react. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the leader, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to make promises," she said, her tone steady. "I'm here to offer a chance. A chance for peace. You may not trust me, but I'm willing to fight for this. If you're willing to work with me, we can rebuild what we've lost." The leader's eyes narrowed. "What makes you think we'll follow you, Lyra? You're no warrior. You're a politician." Jake felt the urge to step in to defend Lyra, but he held back. This was her fight, her moment. He had to trust her. "I may not be a warrior," Lyra said quietly, "but I'm willing to learn. Seen what this war has done to our people, and I won't sit back and let it destroy us. I want to give you something that my mother could never offer. Hope." There was a long pause as the room fell into silence. Jake could feel the tension, but he could also see that Lyra's words were starting to get through. The other leaders were listening, their eyes no longer filled with anger, but with something else. Doubt, curiosity. "We've all lost something," Jake spoke up, breaking the silence. "Our worlds, our families, our futures. But the only way we move forward is together. If you want peace, you have to be willing to take the first step. We can't keep fighting forever." The leader with the scar looked at Jake, and then back at P. "Lyra, I'll give you one chance," he said slowly. "But if you fail, we walk away." Lyra nodded. "I won't fail." As the meeting ended, Jake and Lyra walked out of the room, their hearts racing. The weight of the conversation hung heavily between them, but Jake could see the spark of hope in Lyra's eyes. They had made a breakthrough. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they had a chance. "That went better than I expected," Jake said with a small smile. Lyra smiled back, though there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "It's a start, but it's just one step. We need more than just words. We need action." Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get there. Together." And for the first time in a long while, Lyra truly believed it. The path to peace was still uncertain, but with Jake by her side, she felt like it was possible. The tension had never been higher. Lyra and Jake had made some progress with the faction leaders, but they knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The next few days were filled with non-stop meetings, negotiations, and delicate talks. Day brought new challenges, and Jake could see that Lyra was beginning to feel the weight of everything on her shoulders. They had managed to get a few factions to agree to join the peace talks, but others were still resistant. Some of them believed that the war was the only way to secure their future. Others feared losing their power if they laid down their arms. The divide was clear, and Lyra knew that she couldn't change their minds overnight. But she wasn't ready to give up. One evening, after another long day of discussions, Lyra and Jake found themselves back in the small, quiet courtyard where they had talked before. This time, the air was thick with uncertainty. They had just received word that one of the major factions was planning to launch an attack on a neighboring planet. And if they did, it could jeopardize everything they had worked for. Lyra stood, with her arms crossed, looking out at the stars. Jake could tell she was deep in thought. He approached her quietly, unsure of what to say. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft. Lyra turned to face him, her expression tired but determined. "I don't know what to do, Jake. This war, it's tearing everything apart. We're so close, but one wrong move, and it could all fall apart. I need to stop them before it's too late." Jake could see the fear in her eyes, but there was something else there too, a fierce determination. She wasn't going to let the war destroy what little hope they had left. He admired that strength, but he also knew that she couldn't carry the burden alone. "You don't have to do it by yourself," Jake said gently. "You've got people who believe in you." "I believe in you," Lyra smiled, though it was faint. "I know you do, but it's not just about me anymore. It's about everyone. The entire galaxy is watching us. If we fail now, we might not get another chance." Jake stepped closer, his voice steady. "We won't fail. We'll figure it out together. You don't have to carry the weight of the galaxy on your own." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his. "I know, but I'm not sure how much more I can take." Jake reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a reassuring squeeze. "One step at a time. We've made it this far. We'll keep moving forward." The next day they received an urgent call from one of the resistance leaders. The faction that had been preparing for an attack was making their move. They had already launched a few ships and were heading toward the target. The news hit like a shockwave, and the entire base went into full alert. Lyra and Jake immediately called an emergency meeting with the rest of the leaders. Tension was thick in the room as they discussed their options. Some leaders wanted to retaliate immediately, while others insisted on finding a diplomatic solution. It was clear that the room was divided, and every second counted. "I don't care about diplomacy right now," shouted one of the older leaders, his face red with anger. "Our people are under attack. We need to strike back." Lyra stood up, her voice calm but firm. "If we strike back now, we risk everything. The other factions will see it as a declaration of war. We need to stop this before it escalates. I want to be remembered as the leader who destroyed what my mother built." Jake could see the pressure mounting on Lyra. The weight of every decision seemed to fall on her, and he could tell that she was struggling. But she wasn't giving up. Not yet. "We need to find a way to stop them without further bloodshed," Lyra continued. "Jake and I have been working on a plan.
What?
We need your trust, and we need your support." The room fell silent as the leaders exchanged uncertain glances. Jake stepped forward, his voice steady. "We've come too far to let a few bad decisions ruin everything. You have to stop them, but we need to act fast." After a long, tense silence, one of the leaders finally spoke up. "We'll trust you, Lyra. But if this doesn't work, there's no going back." Lyra nodded, grateful for the support, but she knew that the risk was enormous. They had to act quickly to prevent the war from spiraling out of control. Hours later, Jake and Lyra, along with a small group of trusted allies, were aboard a ship headed toward the enemy's fleet. Their plan was simple but risky. They would board the enemy ships and disable them before they could reach their target. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the only chance they had to avoid full-scale conflict. As the ship approached the enemy fleet, Jake could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had been in combat situations before, but this felt different. This was about more than just winning a battle. This was about stopping a war, about saving the galaxy from more destruction. Lyra stood beside him, her expression serious. "You ready?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's engines. Jake nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease in his gut. "Let's do this." They boarded the enemy ship without detection, moving through the corridors with the precision of a well-trained team. They encountered only a few guards, which was a good sign. But the closer they got to their target, the more the tension built. They had to be quick. One mistake, and they could all be dead. Finally, they reached the control room. Jake and Lyra exchanged a look, both of them knowing that this was the moment. They had to stop the attack before it was too late. With a swift motion, they took control of the room, disabling the ship's weapons and communication systems. The enemy fleet was now neutralized, their plans thwarted. But Jake knew that this was only one battle in a much larger war. There was still a long road ahead. As they returned to their ship, Lyra breathed a sigh of relief. "We did it," she said, her voice full of exhaustion but relief. Jake smiled, though it was short-lived. "It's not over yet. But it's a step in the right direction." Lyra nodded, her gaze focused on the stars ahead. "We have to keep going. We can't stop now." Jake stood beside her, looking out at the vastness of space. "Together, we can make it happen." And for the first time in a long while, Lyra believed him. There were still challenges ahead, but as long as they faced them together, she knew they had a chance. The galaxy felt quieter than usual in the days that followed their daring mission. Lyra and Jake had managed to stop the attack, but the victory came at a price. Tensions between the factions were still high, and the road to lasting peace remained uncertain. But for the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope as the warships returned to their base. Jake felt a sense of accomplishment, but it was short-lived. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The resistance. Leaders were still divided. Peace felt like an impossible dream. Lyra had retreated to her quarters, exhausted from the mission. Jake had spent the night analyzing their next steps, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. He needed to do more to help her, or to make sure they didn't lose everything they had fought for. That evening, Jake knocked on Lyra's door, his hand lingering for a moment before he heard her voice call out, "Come in." He stepped inside, finding her sitting by the window, staring out at the stars. Her posture was slumped, as though the weight of the universe was pressing down on her. "Lyra." Jake's voice was gentle. "You okay?" She looked up at him, her eyes tired but steady. "I'm just thinking about everything we've been through and what's still ahead." Jake moved closer, standing next to her. He could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken thoughts between them. "I know, it's hard, but we've made progress. The factions are starting to listen. We're not done yet, but we're closer than we were." She sighed deeply, turning away from the window. "I don't know if I can keep doing this. Pressure's too much, Jake. Everyone is looking to me for answers, and I don't have them." Jake reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to have all the answers. You've already done more than anyone expected. But I'm here. I'll help you however I can." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes softening. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had been trying to keep his feelings in check, but seeing Lyra like this made it hard to ignore the connection that had grown between them. He wanted to tell her how he felt, but now wasn't the time. She had too much on her plate, and he didn't want to add to her burden. "You're not alone," Jake said quietly. "And you don't have to carry all of this by yourself. In this together." Lyra smiled faintly, her shoulders relaxing. "I know. It's just ... Sometimes it feels like no matter what we do, we can't win. The war, the resistance, it all seems so pointless." Jake shook his head. "It's not pointless. Every step we take, every alliance we make, is a step toward peace. It's just going to take time. But we're getting there." Lyra looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you really believe that? That peace is possible?" Jake nodded. "I have to believe it. We've already seen what happens when we give up. We can't stop now." She was quiet for a moment, then stood and walked to the door. "You're right. We can't stop. We've come too far." Jake followed her out. Into the corridor, where the rest of the team was gathering. There was a new sense of urgency in the air. A message had just come in from another faction, one of the more influential ones. They had agreed to meet to discuss joining the peace talks. It was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. As they walked to the meeting room, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This wasn't just about Lyra anymore. This was about everyone. The people who had fought for so long, the ones who had lost so much. They were all counting on them to make this work. The meeting room was bustling, with leaders from various factions. Lyra entered first, followed closely by Jake. The room fell silent as she took her place at the head of the table, her posture strong and confident. She had grown into the role of leader in ways Jake hadn't thought possible. The uncertainty that had once marked her was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve. "Thank you all for coming," Lyra began, her voice steady but commanding. "We're here today because we have a chance to end this war. But it's going to take all of us, working together to make it happen." One of the leaders, a tall alien with sharp features, spoke up. "We've heard your proposals, Lyra, but we are not ready to lay down our arms. You can't expect us to trust you after everything that's happened." Jake could see the skepticism in the room, but he also saw something else. There was a flicker of doubt in their eyes, a sign that they were beginning to consider the possibility of peace. "We're not asking for blind trust," Jake said, stepping forward. "We're asking for a chance to work together and find a solution that doesn't end in more bloodshed. We've already seen the consequences of war. Can't keep going down this path." The room was silent for a moment as the leaders exchanged looks. It was clear that they were weighing their options, unsure whether to take the risk. Lyra spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "I understand your fear. I understand your anger. But this war has taken everything from us. If we don't stop now, there will be nothing left to fight for." Jake watched as the leaders looked at each other, some nodding in agreement, others still uncertain. It was a slow process, but it was happening. They were listening. Finally, the leader who had spoken earlier stood up. "You make a good point, Lyra. Perhaps it is time to try something different." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. It wasn't a total victory, but it was a start. Lyra's expression softened as she looked at Jake. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done this without you." Jake smiled back, his heart swelling with pride. You did it, Lyra. We're doing it. As the meeting concluded, Jake and Lyra stood outside the room, a sense of accomplishment hanging in the air. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a real chance at peace. Lyra looked at Jake, her eyes bright with determination. We're not finished yet, but this is the beginning. Jake nodded, his hand resting on her shoulder, and we'll see it through, together. In that moment, they both knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they were ready. They had each other, and that was all they needed to keep fighting for the future of the galaxy.